I'm part of the Presidential Support Squadron. That was my last duty assignment under George H.W. Bush, and I hated my job. I was no longer in flying status. President Bush didn't go anywhere. And guess what you do when you're a part of the Air Force One ground crew and Air Force One isn't going anywhere? Remember the movie Karate Kid? Mm-hmm. Wax on, wax off. You ever wax a 747?
So you did that?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like fun, does it?
No.
I didn't. So I got out. And I became a school teacher.
Wow.
Bill Nye brings unwavering discipline and kindness to multifamily education. His Ohio farm upbringing shaped his commitment to hard work, while the Air Force revealed education's transformative power. Rising from maintenance supervisor to CEO in just 3.5 years, Bill refused to leave open work orders and focused on solutions rather than blame. Now a sought-after speaker, he shares leadership wisdom with his signature approach. If I'm supposed to do something, I do it.
My break into the multifamily business was a maintenance supervisor back in 1994 in Durham, North Carolina. And I just never stopped. I would not go home at the end of the day with an open work order. I don't care how many work orders came in. If you turn in a work order today, it was going to get taken care of today. You know, we bought our home here in Friendswood, Texas. It had like no outdoor seating space. Today we have a 540 square foot multi-level deck with power. We have 3 water features. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I built every inch of it myself.
Do you enjoy doing a lot of things?
Oh yeah.
What happens next?
Oh boy.
Bill, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to do this. Thank you for the intros and the warm welcome to Houston. We were just chatting before this, and I want to bring it up. For those that don't know, Bill's full name is Bill Nye, and he goes by Bill Nye, the apartment guy.
Right.
So I was asking Bill, and I said, let's get this answer on air because I'm curious. Does it annoy you?
Yeah. So as a professional speaker, every time I would go somewhere to speak, especially apartment association conferences, management companies, they would always get up and they'd say, so we have Bill Nye, not the science guy, but Bill Nye, the apartment guy. And I can't roll my eyes, but I wanted to. Internally, I'm like, why do I always have to be Bill Nye, the something guy? Why can't I just, and I hated it. So yes, it annoyed me. And so a couple of years ago, I had this epiphany. I thought, you know what? The people have spoken. That's what they want to call me. And so I completely rebranded my website as BillNyeApartmentGuy.com because it's what people, it's how they remember me. And whether or not I like it is not important. What's important is that people remember me and it's easy for people to find me. So that's why I officially go by BillNyeApartmentGuy.com.
I like it. It's memorable. Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. But the interesting thing is, I get a couple of comments from this, especially like at hotels when I check in. People will often say to me, you're not really Bill Nye. What is that supposed to mean? Of course I am. Yes, I am. I am really Bill Nye. I know what they mean. I'm not the science guy. I've never claimed to be. But they say, you're not really Bill Nye. Yes, I am really Bill Nye. But the interesting thing is his full name is William S. Nye because Bill is a derivative of William. Not everybody knows that, but his full name is William S. Nye. My full name is William S. Nye. So we have the same full, the first name, middle initial, last name. So, but, people say, man, it must have been tough growing up. Well, he's only 7 years older than me. So, when I was in kindergarten, the age of 5, he was only 12. So, growing up as a child, it wasn't a thing because,
he wasn't even famous. Yeah.
Well, neither one of us were famous yet.
Yeah. Wait, so when did it start? When did people start making that comparison?
Yeah, so 1990 is when it started. So PBS broadcast his show, but Disney produced it. And the interesting thing is, I was living in Clinton, Maryland at the time. I had just gotten out of the Air Force. I served in the Air Force from 1981 to 1990, so from the ages of 21 to 30. I just gotten out of the Air Force, and I go check my mail, and I had a full-color brochure in my mailbox promoting this show that Bill Nye the Science Guy was coming on TV, and that was my introduction to it. I asked other people if they saw that. Nobody else got this flyer, so I don't have any evidence of this, but I suspect that Disney or PBS may have done a nationwide search on everyone named Bill Nye and mailed the flyer to every Bill Nye in the country to let us know that they were about to ruin our lives.
I'm just curious, how often does it come up now? Like, is it once a week kind of thing?
It's not quite every day now.
Yeah.
It's probably in a 7-day period. It's probably 5 out of 7 days. But as recent as 2 years ago, it was every day. Somebody would be the first to, I hand my debit card. My debit card, has my name on it, or my credit card. And so anytime people see my name, the funny thing is, so my wife and I do Orange Theory Fitness.
Okay.
And in Orange Theory, up on the screen, they have your first name, your last name, initial. And people would constantly tease like Bill N, like Bill Nye. And I said, well, that's, and we were members there for like a couple of years when I said, well, that's actually my name. What is? Bill Nye. Wait, so I've been calling you Bill Nye. Your name really is Bill Nye? I'm like, yeah, that really is my name. They were blown away. They just decided that the N stood for Nye because it was a famous name.
Yeah.
And then they discovered that it's actually my name. So yeah, it comes up almost every day.
That's wild. Okay, well, welcome. Really excited to chat with you. I think where we normally start and where I'd be curious to learn a little bit about is your upbringing, where you grew up and what that was like.
Yeah, so I think it's a fun story. So my wife and I were just talking about this last night. So I was born and raised in Ohio, in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, in Amish country, raised on a farm to a family of Quakers. When I talk about this, I remember my daughter when she was 8, she's in her early 30s now, but she was 8 and I was saying something about being raised a Quaker, and Rachel, my daughter, said, Daddy, what is a Quaker? I said, well, it's kind of a really primitive religion, but we made the best oatmeal you've ever had. And she looked at me, she said, so you'd go to church and make oatmeal? I'm like, oh, man, I wasted a perfectly good joke on an 8-year-old, right? It went right over her head. But yeah, so I was raised one of 6 kids. And so my dad was a construction worker by day and a farmer, at night on the weekends. And so, during the summer, while my dad was out building homes, working in construction, my brother and my 2 older sisters and I, we're out in the fields working on the farm. And so, very humble means, my parents were high school dropouts. My dad dropped out of high school about 2 months before he was due to graduate because he wanted to serve the country. So he dropped out, enlisted in the United States Marine Corps, and shipped off to Korea and fought in the Korean War. And at the age of, I believe it was 72, I could be off by a year or two, but I believe at the age of 72, my father's high school had him come back to their graduation ceremony. And at the age of 72, they presented my dad with his high school diploma.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
That is really cool.
So my dad became kind of a hometown hero of sorts. So, as my dad got older and we were all gone, my parents are no longer raising kids. My dad got really involved in the community through the American Legion post and became the commander of the post and introduced all kinds of great, programs to help people in the community. My dad was that guy that if somebody's house got a tree fell on their house at 2:00 in the morning, at 2:15, my dad was out there with a chainsaw and ropes, and he was after it. He was that guy. And so he got super involved in the American Legion, doing all kinds of things for people. And so every year in the high schools within the county, my dad would go at graduation, and anybody who enlisted in the military, he would show up in his Legion uniform and he would present them with a gift for enlisting in the United States services, regardless of whether it's the Marines, Air Force, Navy, the Marines. And so that's how he made this contact with the principal of that school, who, as it turns out, actually went to high school with my dad. And so when he discovered, that my dad, didn't have his diploma and all of his community service, and he was this close to graduating, he invited my dad back. My dad had no idea why he was invited back. And so they started calling the names of all the graduates, and they called my dad's name like he was one of the graduates that year. And they presented my dad with his high school diploma.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So my parents, high school dropouts. My siblings were all high school dropouts, with the exception of my sister Patty. Everybody's a high school dropout except Patty and myself. And so, we're the only ones who actually, so my parents put no emphasis on education. And, my brothers and sisters are all salt of the earth, working with their hands, blue collar workers, good people. But, that's why education is so important to me, is because I grew up where there was no emphasis on education. And I've learned how much education has changed my life and given me opportunities to see things, do things, meet people, give back in ways that I couldn't have done without it. So that's why, I've really just made education, my lifetime commitment. Former high school teacher, and now, professional educator to the apartment industry.
Why do you think your parents didn't put emphasis on education? That's
a great question. I wish I had an answer, but my parents are both passed, so I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if it's because their parents didn't. They grew up, in a rough era where no electricity, no plumbing, farmers out in the country, and it just wasn't important to them. My parents valued hard work more than anything else, and there's certainly tremendous value in hard work, right? Mm-hmm. So they're not wrong about that, but I think it's a combination of the two. I think if you have the work ethic and the education, I think you're better off.
So when you say they valued hard work, did you see that as a way to win their approval as a kid?
Oh yeah, 100%. That was a big part of the currency in our home growing up was hard work, and I had a couple of siblings that didn't have that same work ethic, and it was tough for them, because, it really frustrated my parents. And my mother in particular, could be extremely harsh. And so if my mom didn't see the work ethic, my mom could be pretty brutal on you, verbally.
What did your mom, was your mom a stay-at-home mom?
She was, yep.
Okay. Why do you think some of the siblings had the work ethic and others didn't?
Yeah, I mean, the only explanation is, I think, is just DNA, just genetics.
Yeah.
I just think some personalities, just have that work ethic where you get after it and others just don't.
Yeah. And you remember at a young age, you had that.
I like to believe I did. Yeah. My wife says that she's never met anybody who just never stops. So every home project. Now, my break into the multifamily business was a maintenance supervisor back in 1994 in Durham, North Carolina. And I just never stopped. And I tell people all the time, and my wife's like, come on, that can't be true. But it absolutely is true. I would not go home at the end of the day with an open work order. I don't care how many work orders came in. I would not go home with an open work order. If you turn in a work order today, it was going to get taken care of today, unless I needed to order parts or it required, a second phase, drywall work, that sort of thing. It was going to get addressed. And so at our home, we bought our home here in Friendswood, Texas. It had no outdoor seating space. Today we have a 540 square foot multi-level deck with power. We have 3 water features. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I built every inch of it myself. And my wife says I just, I don't slow down. I just go because that's how I was raised.
Do you enjoy doing a lot of things?
Oh yeah.
You do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like home projects.
Oh, yeah.
Really? Why? Yeah. The reason I asked that question is, I guess I understand why. My dad is the same way. He loves doing the home projects and tinkering things here and building all these things. And for me, it just, I just don't like it. I don't know. It just, what is it about it that you enjoy?
I have 2 sons and I think they both feel the same way. For me, it's the satisfaction looking back and seeing what you've done. I just recently stoned our entire fireplace all the way up to the ceiling, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And to be able to look at it and know that I did that myself. I'm the same way with cutting the grass. I love to cut the grass. And, that can be tough here in Texas. In July and August when it's 98 degrees and 95% humidity, you walk outside, you look like you're taking a shower within 2 minutes, right? I mean, the sweat just everywhere. But it's the satisfaction of looking at it and seeing the beautiful work at the end. And I'm very meticulous, To me, cutting the grass isn't just pushing the lawnmower over the yard. It's edging, it's trimming, it's pulling weeds, it's removing any debris, all the way to the finest detail. I'm very, very anal about it. But it's just that satisfaction of knowing that I did this, that, my labor produced this. When I step outside onto our deck and I hear the water features going and we sit on a chair, whether it's a recliner or a swinging chair, just to sit there, watch the birds coming into the bird feeders that we have and seeing all the beautiful flowers. We have planter boxes. I mean, it just brings tremendous satisfaction. Know that my sweat, did this.
Are you a perfectionist?
I'm not a perfectionist. It's funny because I'm not a detailed person. I ran a management company, for a number of years, and I just want the overview. I don't want all the details. So I'm not a perfectionist because I think to be a perfectionist, I think you have to be a detailed person.
Yeah. So going back to, you mentioned was it 5 siblings or?
I have 4 now. My oldest sister's passed, but yeah, I grew up with 5 siblings. So I just want to say we were like the Brady Bunch, 3 boys, 3 girls. I was the middle boy. So for anyone who remembers the Brady Bunch, you had Greg, Peter, and Bobby. I would be Peter.
Peter. What was the relationship amongst all of you like growing up?
It was tough. Because our mother was so harsh, I didn't grow up in a home where there was love and affection. I grew up in a home where it was, work, 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 work. And I think because of that, there was no real love and affection between us as siblings. And so, there was no boundaries in terms of, it's interesting. I recently wrote a book called Culture Grows. And in the book, I defined culture as 3 things: what you expect, what you will and will not tolerate, and how you treat one another. And I think a lot of companies, when they're growing their culture, they really ignore, or maybe they don't know to pay attention to that 3rd element, which is how you treat one another. I think that's a critical element in any culture, how you treat one another. You go back and look at the cultures and civilizations. And for instance, I lived in Japan for 3 years, and the way they treat the elderly is beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. We're not that way here in America. And so my point is that there was no emphasis on how we treated one another. And I had a tough conversation with my mother several years ago. She was really upset that, that the 6 of us were not close. And I simply said, Mom, you can't expect us to be close when you allowed there to be so much, hatred and anger and constant fighting as kids, and then expect us to grow up as adults and be loving and affectionate towards one another. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. I have a great relationship with 2 of my remaining siblings, but I have 2 siblings that, quite frankly, I don't ever hear from. I don't see. We go years and have absolutely no contact with one another at all. Mm. It's unfortunate, but it is that's what it's become.
Do you know where they are and stuff?
Oh yeah. They're both in Ohio. I don't have their addresses. I don't have their phone numbers, but I know they're both in Ohio. Yeah.
When you think about why your mom was so tough, if you were a fly on the wall in her mind growing up when you were a kid, what do you think you would see?
Yeah. So I think it's because her mother was equally tough. I used to say as a kid growing up that my grandmother was the meanest woman in America. And then she passed away and handed the crown to my mother. So, I think it's how my mother was raised. My grandmother was 1st generation American, came here from Germany, very harsh, very stern German woman. Everything was rules. Everything was, work and chores and, just do as I say and don't ever question me. And that's how my mother was raised. And my mother just kind of followed, my mother inherited her mother's temperament. Mm. And so she was very much like her own mother.
What I find really interesting though is, it's this is common, right? You inherit characteristics from your parents and then the cycle continues going. But what I find really interesting is how you decided to choose education as a big priority when nobody, including your siblings besides one, actually prioritized that. Where did that come from? Why did you have that desire to make education a big part of your life?
That was the Air Force. The Air Force did. So when I enlisted in the Air Force, I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go to college in the worst way coming out of high school. And so I was a pretty good high school basketball player. I wasn't D1 good, but I was pretty good. And so I had an opportunity to play Division II college basketball. I was being recruited. And so a coach came and picked me up and took me to Pontiac, Michigan to visit the college and attend a game and talk about what they could do from an academic scholarship standpoint. And at the end of the visit, it was going to cost me out of pocket about $1,700 a year to go to college. Now, you think about that in today's world, right? $1,700. It's man, that's free education. But in my world, $1,700 may as well have been $170,000. It was just, an amount that was too big to overcome. And so I remember, getting back from that trip and excited, and I'm going to do it. So the trip included myself and another guy. The other guy accepted the offer and went on. And today he works at the University of Pittsburgh in their enrollment department. And so he took him up on a scholarship. I wasn't able to because, my mother said, where are you going to get $1,700? We don't have that kind of money. You don't have that kind of money. It can't be done. So, I followed in my parents' advice, which is just get a job. So I got a job as a logger, as a lumberjack. So I started working in the logging business out of high school. And, I love to work with my hands. I love hard work. And so here I am. I'm working in Ohio as a logger. We're cutting down trees so big that you couldn't wrap your arms around these trees. They were massive hardwood trees, oak and maple, hickory. These are very common in Ohio. And I absolutely loved it. And I thought, I found my dream. I'm going to be a logger for the rest of my life. In fact, here's a little interesting story.
You remember thinking that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was in love.
Well,
yeah.
why did you love it so much?
Oh, because I love that nature, the nature of the work. I love to be outdoors.
Yeah.
I loved being in the woods. And I love the camaraderie I had with the other loggers. We were all young, physical guys, proud of our physical strength. And so, we goofed around and laughed and made fun of each other. When you're a 19, 20-year-old guy, that's what you do, right?
Yeah.
And, I'm wearing my flannel shirt, my big red suspenders, my Timberland boots, got my hats covered in wood sap, chainsaw over my shoulder. It was just
I'm like picturing that.
It's a beautiful job. I loved it. And this was during the Carter administration, and our economy just went like south bad. And so there were no jobs. And so the company I worked for went out of business. We went broke. I'm like, man, now what? Where do I go from here? And so, I kept thinking, there's got to be another plan, because if I can't do what I love and I can't go to college, what do I do? And so I got a job in a factory, because my parents were like, just get a job in a factory and learn to be happy. So I got a job in a factory, but I didn't learn to be happy. I hated it. I was miserable. So here I am. I'm going to this second shift job in a stinking factory. Inside, it's dark, it's smelly. And I'm at home one day, and I saw a commercial, an Army commercial. And the commercial said, be all you can be. And they said that they will pay for your college tuition. I said, that's it. That's my golden ticket. I'm going to enlist in the Army, and I'm going to get my college education. So I went down and I met with an Army recruiter, and I'm not kidding. I walked away from that, and I said, this is one of the dumbest human beings I've ever met in my life.
Oh, you really?
Yeah, I did. I thought that. I thought, if everybody in the Army is this dumb, I don't want to do this. That's terrible. And I'm sorry for everybody. My son, I have a son-in-law who's in the Army now. So, I apologize if that's offensive. If anybody ever served in the Army, but that was my experience. So I'm like, man, what do I do? So I decided, you know what? My dad was a Marine. And if they offer the same program, I'm going to enlist in the Marines. So I went and met with the Marine recruiter. He's like, yeah, this is a Department of Defense program. We all offer this. We'll all pay for your college education. I'm like, that's it. I'm a tough guy. When you're 19, 20, 21, how do you really judge yourself, right? It's your athleticism, your strength. You get older, you realize that's stupid.
Yeah.
But when you're young, that's all you know. So I'm going to do it. So I'm no longer living at home. I go back to the farm. I meet with my parents, and I said, I'm gonna enlist in the Marines. And I knew my dad was gonna be like, yes, my boy's following him, because my dad loved being a Marine. And my dad looked at me and he said, don't do it. Like, what? He said, you're not gonna learn any skills that are gonna help you when you get out. Don't become a Marine. All they're gonna teach you is how to march 20 miles with a pack over your back. And what are you going to do with that when you get out? I'm like, man, he crushed me. I was devastated. Now, I hate the water. So the Navy's out of the question. And there's no way I'm joining the Air Force, because the Air Force, this is really how I thought back then. The Air Force is for sissies. Sissies join the Air Force. Men don't join the Air Force. Men join the Marines. And I can't join the Marines because my dad told me not to. Even though I could have made that decision, that's not how I was raised. If my dad said, do or don't do something, you listen to him. So the Navy's out, the Air Force is out. I go back to my lousy factory job, and every day I'm just becoming more and more miserable. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to go talk to an Air Force recruiter. So, because I work second shift, I get up in the morning, I go to the Air Force recruiting office. And the Air Force recruiter was the coolest guy I think I'd ever met in my life. He was so cool. He looked good in that uniform. He was muscular. He was fit. I'm like, yeah, I really like this guy. And at this point, I said, you know what? I'm not going to talk to my dad. I'm just going to do it. I committed to it right there on the spot. I signed up to join the United States Air Force. He and I went outside. He hands me a cigar. I'd never smoked in my life. We didn't grow up. You didn't smoke. You didn't drink. There was no profanity. And
you didn't drink and stuff.
No. No. And so, that was part of our, we were raised as Quakers, and that was part of the Quaker upbringing. Yeah. And so, we step outside, and he says, every time I sign a new recruit, we celebrate with a cigar. He handed me a cigar. I lit that cigar, and I got so sick, I threw up from it. Because I'd never smoked before. I didn't know what to do. Yeah. I'm inhaling smoke from a cigar because I didn't know how to smoke a cigar. And it made me so sick, I literally threw up as a result of it. And he laughed at me, and he's like, you don't inhale the smoke from a cigar. I didn't know, but off I go. So I'm making this a really long answer to your question, and I apologize.
No, it's a great story.
So now I'm in the Air Force, and everything is, and I'm exposed to people from all over America. And I'm so impressed by the diversity. I grew up where there was no diversity. I went to an all-white high school. There was nobody in my high school who didn't look like me. And so I'm impressed by the diversity. And I mean diversity in every way. Diversity of thought, diversity in color, diversity, in race. I'm so intrigued by this. And so I suddenly begin to realize there is so much more to this world than what I've been exposed to on this farm, with my family. So I get selected, and it was a tremendous honor. And this is where it all really changed for me. I got selected to attend the NCO Leadership Academy that the Air Force has. And you live at the school, and class is like from 5 a.m. in the morning until they decide class is over. And then you study until you can't keep your eyes open. You get a couple hours sleep, and you wake up the next morning. You do this every day for 30 days. And it's all about teaching you how to be an effective leader. And that education just completely changed my life. And by the time we graduated, they had 5 awards they gave out to students for, accomplishments or high achievement. And I won 2 of those 5 awards. And so not only did I graduate, but I graduated as one of the best students in the school, which, was really tough to do because not everybody got to go to this school. It was the best of the best. And to graduate from this school and then to be honored at graduation as one of the best of the best of the best, that's when I realized that my path forward beyond the Air Force was education. The education was an opportunity for me to not only impact my life, but impact the lives of everybody else around me. So that's what did it for me. That was the defining moment, if you will, that completely changed the course of my life, was the Air Force NCO Leadership Academy.
Wow. And when you think about why you did so good in education, was it a function of just working hard, or was it a function of like you think you had a natural aptitude?
No, I'll never think that I have a natural aptitude. This is going to sound maybe ridiculous, but I shared this with the folks who were my direct reports when I ran a management company, and I said, I'm going to be honest with y'all. When I walk into a meeting, we all walk in with hidden insecurities, vulnerabilities that we don't admit openly. When I walk into a meeting, I start to wonder how long before everybody else in the room realizes I'm the dumbest person in this room. We're a lot, we all get frustrated with the person who thinks they're the smartest person in the room. I'm the opposite. I walk in thinking I'm the dumbest person in the room, which is probably ridiculous, but it's just my personal demon. So I don't think it's aptitude. I think it's just discipline. My wife will tell you I'm a very disciplined person. If I'm supposed to do something, I do it. If I'm supposed to be somewhere, I'm there. I'm always early. To me, being on time is being late. And so, I'm just a very disciplined person. William McRaven, he gave the famous speech, make your bed every day. They've written a book. People have watched a video. I've been making my bed every day, for years and years and years. It's interesting. When I went to basic training, I would watch my peers cry because of how hard it was. And I'm not saying this to be proud or boastful. I found it to be really easy because to me, basic training was just about being disciplined and doing what you're supposed to do. And that came naturally to me. And so I think it's more about being disciplined. If you're supposed to study, you sit down and you study and you stay with it until it's embedded in you. So I think it's more about, just putting in the effort.
So I want to dive in. I'm curious about what your daily routine, because it's really interesting. We've talked to multiple people for the show, and many people actually grew up on a farm, believe it or not. It seems like maybe it's I don't know if it's a Texas thing or whatever, but a lot of people we've talked to grew up on a farm, and everybody has their own interpretation of that experience.
Yeah.
I think hard work and the ability to work hard is a common thread. Growing up, what would you say your daily routine looked like? What does it even mean to work on a farm?
Yeah. So for us, it was because, everything that we had on our table, we grew or raised.
Farm
and
table.
So, yeah, right. And so, we had chickens, we had milk cows, we had beef cows, we had pigs, we had, all of the livestock. And then we had a field full of corn and hay, and we had, vegetables that we grew that we sold and ate ourselves. So it was, you wake up in the morning and we all had our assigned chores. So these animals had to be fed, and they had to be watered, and the cows had to be milked. And so my brother, my youngest brother is quite a bit younger, so I don't really remember him having the same routine. But my brother Don and I, it was, go out to the barn. We had literally a pump on our front porch. We would pump the water into the buckets, carry the buckets to the barn, and fill the water troughs, and we would fill the hay, the hay bins so that the cows could eat hay, and we were dumping corn, and we were feeding the chickens, and we were gathering the eggs. And by the time we finished that, we get back in the house, my mother and my sisters, my three sisters, would be in the kitchen, and they're making breakfast. And we were like the old TV show, The Waltons, and that's a really old reference. But we would sit at this big wooden table, benches down both sides, chairs at the ends. Mom sat at one end, Dad sat at the other end, and we would just sit on those benches, and we would have a big breakfast every morning as a family. And then during the school year, we'd finish breakfast, we'd clear our plates. My sisters would do the dishes, because I grew up, men didn't do the dishes, which is funny because in our home, I probably do 80% of the dishes. But, my sisters would do the dishes, and we were in dirty clothes. So I'd go up to my room that I shared with my two brothers, and I would change out of my dirty clothes because, I'd have, manure on my boots and stuff on my shirt, and I'd wear bib overalls, change out of that, put on my school clothes, come back down, and we'd catch the bus, and off to school we'd go. So that's how we, that was our daily routine during the school year.
Wow. You mentioned something earlier. You described, you feel, you'd walk in a room and you felt like you were the dumbest person. It's like a demon, right?
Yeah, right.
What other demons would you say that you have?
Oh boy, that one to me is such a big one that, it probably gets most of my attention, so, I'm not naturally a very secure person. I'm probably, I would say that I'm insecure. Probably one of my demons is, I overcompensate my insecurity. I want people to like me. So I think I'm a very friendly, outgoing person, but sometimes I think I overplay humor in times when it's inappropriate. And I can think back on times where I've tried to play humor, and it's really me just trying to get people to like me. Because I'm, my insecurity is, if I'm not funny, you're not going to like me. So I have to be funny. That's the only way you're going to like me. And I have to remind myself, you're going to like me because I'm a genuine, nice, kind, thoughtful, polite person. That would make anyone likable, right? Yeah. And so I think I overuse humor sometimes when I don't need to. And I look back and I'm embarrassed when I do it because it was a mistake.
I want to continue on. So you get into the Air Force. What happens next?
So I'm stationed in the most beautiful place in America. It's called Altus, Oklahoma. When I got stationed at Altus, they said, I'm single. They said, you're going to love this place. There's a beautiful woman behind every tree. They were right. There weren't any trees. It was flat and barren and just dusty and awful. And, but I started my career and I found that the Air Force really fit my personality well. There was a lot of instant gratification. If you're disciplined, you get recognized. You really own your own path forward. And so, I wanted to get on flying status. I remember when I talked to the recruiter and he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a pilot. And he said, you can't be a pilot. You have to have a college degree, and you don't have a college degree, which is why I went into the Air Force, is for them to pay for my college degree. And so I wanted to fly in the worst way. And so, I don't know why I had this intuition, but I'm glad I did. I asked, so when I got to Cleveland, which is where they test you, and then they say, okay, based on your testing skills, these are the career fields or career paths you can take. And I talk about, I don't think that I have a natural aptitude from an educational standpoint. So I take the test and they said, you qualify for every job we have. I'm like, wow. So I must have done really well, right? And so they wanted me to be an air traffic controller. I'm like, oh no, that sounds awful. I don't want to be an air traffic controller. Can't tell you why I didn't like the idea of being an air traffic controller. Didn't really know anything about it. That's not what I wanted to do. It didn't seem like it was active enough, if that makes sense. And it probably isn't, right? I don't think air traffic controllers are getting up from their seat and being very active, right? Planes crash if you do that. Yeah. So you better focus and pay attention. So I said no. And it's funny, the kid who went into the room before me, he told me he wanted to be an air traffic controller. So I just assumed if you said that's what you wanted to be, that's what you got to be. He came out and they told him that he couldn't be an air traffic controller because he didn't test well enough. So I remember when they asked me if I wanted to be air traffic controller, and I said no. I said, the guy before me, that's what he wanted to do. Why don't you let him do it? And they said, well, he didn't test well enough. I'm like, what? I was so naive, right? But I'm on the verge of my 21st birthday. What do I know about anything, You ask me about coon dogs or hunting dogs or, chickens or cows or, I could answer you, but the rest of the world, it was very foreign to me. And so, I get in, and so I said, so what will get me there? If I can't be a pilot, how do I fly? And they said, well, you can be a load master. Well, what is that? And they explained what that was. You're the guy who's in charge of the cargo on a cargo plane. Like, Or you could be a flight engineer. What's that? Like, well, you sit in the flight deck, in the cockpit, behind the pilot and the co-pilot, and you control the hydraulics, the avionics, the fuel, all of that. I'm like, oh, that sounds really cool. Okay, that's what I want to do. Well, you can't do that. You have to be an E4. So is there a career? And this is where I'm shocked I had this intuition. I said, is there a career path that is more common to get there than others? And they said, yeah, crew chief. What's a crew chief? Well, you're an aircraft mechanic on the plane, and eventually you become a flight engineer on that same plane. I'm like, okay, well, then I want to be a crew chief. Done. So I became a crew chief. And so then I said, okay, so you have to be an E4. Well, you go in, you're an E1. Like, well, how long does it take to become an E4? Well, 6 months, you become an E2. And a year later, you become an E3. But you have to be an E4 buck sergeant. The Air Force has 2 grades of E4, E4 senior airman, E4 buck sergeant. And so it's 6 months for the first one, another year, and then it's a couple more years. So they said typically to become an E4 buck sergeant, it takes 4 years. Your enlistment's up. And then someone said, unless you go below the zone. What is that? Well, there's an opportunity to become an E4 senior airman much, much quicker. And they explain you go before this board and you have to be nominated. And so I'm like, I'm going to do that. I don't know how I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. And lo and behold, here I am. I'm an E3, and they're taking nominations to go before the board for the below the zone promotion. And my NCO was so taken by my commitment, my discipline, my work, that he said, I'm going to nominate you to go below the zone. Yes, now I'm 2.5 years in. And so I go below the zone. And so you go before this panel of officers, and they ask you all these current affairs questions, they ask you all these military history questions. You have to march into the room. You have to stop right in front of the man who's in the middle, render a salute. Then you have to sit down without looking at the chair, and you have to sit at full attention. And then when you get up, you salute again. You do a perfect about face. They judge all this stuff. They judge the way your uniform looks, all of that. And so I go before the board, and then you wait. We're working one day, and our unit commander walks into our hangar. And so they assemble us, and they call us all to attention. And our unit commander says, where's Airman Nye? Right here, sir. Airman Nye, step up. So I step up to our unit commander, and I remember he looks at me, and he said, Airman, you're out of uniform. And, in the military, like, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. But I have no idea what he's talking about, because I was really, really like...
You paid attention.
Oh, heck yeah. My uniform was always right. And I knew that. So I just said, sir? He said, you're out of uniform. Sir, I don't understand. He said, you're wearing the wrong stripes. And he hands me the stripes. I got it. I got the promotion. I got the below the zone promotion. And now all of a sudden, boom, I become an E4. And then all you can do is just wait. And so then I wait, for it to go from a senior airman to to a E4 buck sergeant. And once I got that, then I was eligible to request a transfer, to cross train to go to flight engineer school. And so I submitted that, and boom, got in and became a flight engineer. Now I'm on flying status. I'm wearing a flight suit, flying all over the world, part of the flight crew, just having the best time of my life.
What are the, that's an incredible story.
Thank you.
What are the personality, you mentioned you really felt like the Air Force fit your personality. Yeah. How would you describe the different personalities for the Air Force, Navy, and Marines? Are there different personalities?
I think so, yes, because I think they all have a different mission. For me, I found that the Air Force required a lot of thinking. I found that the Air Force required, the same discipline. But you get to a point in the Air Force in particular, your combat readiness becomes your own personal responsibility. And what I found is that not everybody took that seriously. I took that very seriously. So at 5 a.m., I'm in the gym with my best friend, John Yasinski, who looked like the Incredible Hulk, except he was like 5'7". So he wasn't a very tall guy, but he was just a massive human being, right? Just a ball of muscle. And so at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm at the gym with John Yasinski because, I took my combat readiness very seriously. And so, but I think other branches of the military, that combat readiness, is number one. Where the Air Force, it's you need to stay combat ready, but it's your personal responsibility. So I think, that's why the Air Force may have that reputation of it's not tough, because not everybody takes it seriously. Where, the Marines and the Army, they have to, right? We would go on deployments with the Army in particular, constantly. I was constantly flying, Army Rangers, paratroopers, because, I was on a C-141 Starlifter, which is a large 4-engine cargo plane, troop carrier. And so, we'd go on a deployment, and when we would get to our destination, they'd start setting up tents and sleeping in cots. We'd have a military vehicle come pick us up and take us to the local hotel. And so, we're sleeping in the hotel, we're eating dinner in a restaurant, they're eating dinner out of a box and sleeping on a cot, and that's why I say I think the military, the Air Force, it's more of a thinking man's branch of the military, as opposed to more physical.
So where the heck does maintenance come into play now? When do you get into the apartment industry? What's that story?
Yeah, so 1994. So I'm going through a personal tragedy. It's just my children, my 3 children and me, and so I moved to Durham, North Carolina. We were living so my last duty assignment was Andrews Air Force Base. Typically you'll hear it referred to as Andrews Joint Base. Of course, that's where Air Force One is. So I'm part of the Presidential Support Squadron. That was my last duty assignment under George H.W. Bush. And so I get out of the Air Force, wasn't going to get out of the Air Force, loved it, was going to make it a career, and I hated my job. I was no longer in flying status, and President Bush didn't go anywhere. And guess what you do when you're a part of the Air Force One ground crew and Air Force One isn't going anywhere? Remember the movie Karate Kid? Mm-hmm. Wax on, wax off. You ever wax a 747?
Oh, so you did that?
Yeah, it doesn't sound like fun, does it?
No.
And as soon as you get to the tip of the tail, the chief would say, "I think I see a gnat up there," which is his way of saying, start all over, because it's not going anywhere for another 3 weeks. And so you just start waxing the 747, polishing the tires, cleaning. It's not what I signed up to do. I was miserable, and I didn't like living in the DC area. And so I said, there's no hope for getting out of this assignment. The Air Force viewed that as like a premier assignment. I didn't. I did at first. I get it. The whole being around the President of the United States, being around the Vice President, the First Lady, Barbara Bush, the Bush family. We're also handling any heads of state who flies in. President Macron right now is in D.C. or yesterday meeting with the president. When his presidential plane lands, we would take care of that. So, we're around King Hussein, we're around Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of England then, but that wears off real fast. The waxing doesn't wear off. And once you're on that assignment, they like to keep you there. And I thought, if this is what I have to do, I've got years to go. I don't want to do this. So I got out, and I became a school teacher.
And how old are you at this?
So I'm 30 years old now.
Okay.
Yep.
So you become a school, and then why? And then because you had this experience with in the Air Force with that's how you realized education was important, and you decided to then pursue education.
Yeah. So I'm a big history nerd. I'm a big American history nerd. I will tell you, I probably know more about presidential history than anyone you'll meet. I love this stuff. I get I think it's totally cool. You know, a lot of people, for instance, on 4th of July. President John Adams and President Thomas Jefferson both died on the exact same day, and it happened to be Independence Day. Little facts like that to me.
Why do you like history so much?
I don't know. I really don't know. I just find it to be fascinating. I'm a big baseball fan, and I think no sport really honors its history like baseball, and maybe that's what I love about baseball is how it honors its history. And, I love America, and I love that. I think one of the ways I can honor the history of America is to know the history of America. It's hard to honor something you know nothing about, right? And so because I love our country so much, I think that's my way of honoring our country is to know as much about it as I can. I could literally sit here for hours and just tell you some of the most fascinating stories about former American histories that most people I had no idea. I can tell you stories about presidents. Most people say, I didn't know that was a president. I'd never heard of that.
What's one story?
Okay. So for instance, William Henry Harrison, who was our 9th president. So he served the shortest term in office, 32 days. When he was running for president, his opponent claimed that he was a man of very limited intellectual capabilities is how he positioned it. You know, that was his way back then of saying, I think he's dumb.
Yeah.
Because you were polite back then, right? And so he won the election. William Henry Harrison won the election. And back then, the president was inaugurated in March. FDR is the one who moved it to January because we were in the middle of a war and he had just won a re-election. And he said, we don't have time for all this. Let's just get it over with because we're in the middle of a world war. Of course, World War II. So FDR is the one who moved it to January, but it used to be in March. And so on the day that he was being inaugurated, it was barely above freezing and it was pouring down rain. And to this day, Harrison holds the record for the longest inauguration speech in U.S. history. It was about 2 hours in length. Now, that's a long time to listen to a politician just ramble on. But he did it because he wanted to prove to America that he wasn't a man of limited intellectual capabilities. He did it to prove how smart he was.
Yeah.
Well,
wow, 2 hours.
32 degrees and it's raining. You're an idiot. Shut up and go inside.
Yeah.
But because of it, he contracted pneumonia. And 32 days into his administration, he was dead. His opponent may have been right. You're not very smart. Shut up and go inside and get warm. But here's the interesting thing. Historians believe that the reason they could not cure his pneumonia is because he was actually secretly suffering from syphilis. An interesting thing is his wife never moved into the White House. And maybe it's because she knew her husband was a dirty man.
Wow.
We'll never know.
So how do you learn about history? Like, do you listen to podcasts or do you read books?
I read books. I have a pretty cool library of books about American history. My favorite book, I've read it 3 times, is Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. It's that good. 3 times.
Bury My Heart at what?
Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee.
At Wounded Knee.
Yep. So okay. It's the period where we were trying to expand west, but we had a huge problem as a country. And that is that we discovered that the land was inhibited by Native Americans, by indigenous people. We had to get rid of these people. And of course, that led to all the wars. And so the book is about those wars and, us trying to conquer that land and really steal the land from the indigenous people. And it's just battle story after battle story written, from, firsthand observers and then compiled into this book. And I like to read things that make me feel something. And every time I read it, it makes me feel all these emotions of just like disgust and sadness and empathy and, but it's part of our history, right? Just like slavery is part of our history. It's awful, but I don't want to ignore it. I don't want to drown it out. I want to understand it. How did we get to that point? Why did we do that? And so it's my favorite book that, chronicles any part of our history as a nation, is bury my heart at Wounded Knee.
So we were talking about so you got into the industry.
Yeah, right. So I'm teaching high school, and it was an awful experience. So I'm teaching high school in Washington, D.C., and it was a terrible experience. The kids were just unruly. There was violence constantly. We had shootings in the parking lot. It was just a worst experience of my life. And of course, I'm coming out of the Air Force where everything is disciplined. You do what you're told. And I go into this jungle, this zoo. It was a mess. I'm like, what? I can't do this. I'm going to kill a kid. Yeah. I mean, I was just
What subjects were you teaching?
American history.
Yeah, American. Okay.
Yeah. And so, I'm interacting with these kids, and I want to give them hope and a future, and understand that, hey, listen, this is your ticket to a better life, to get out of these poor neighborhoods, because I'm in the Anacostia area, which was like the worst area in DC. And I'm trying to teach, and I can't teach. And the parents don't care. And most of these kids, they only have one parent at home, and that parent's doing the best they can to raise, to make enough money to pay rent. And the other parent is either dead or on drugs or in prison. I mean, it was just awful. And I'm like, man, this is miserable. And so, we find ourselves in a situation. My kid's mother is gone. She's moved back to Ohio. She's dealing with her own issues with mental health. And so I'm with these kids. And so I need a fresh start. And so I moved to Durham, North Carolina, and now I need two things immediately. I need a home, right, a place to live, and I need a source of income. And so I'm talking to somebody who I didn't know at the hotel where I'm staying, and this person's asked me, so, what have you done? And so I start to go through my line of work and the things I've done. And as a school teacher, you don't make enough money to survive. So I started working, in the construction field on the side, on the weekends and the evenings, and then during the summer months. And so I learned a lot of different trades. I learned how to be a plumber, an electrician. I could lay tile. And that's why, I did the stone on my fireplace. I could do carpentry work. And this person said, sounds like you'd be a good maintenance man in the apartment community. Like, really? Well, what is that? I didn't know what that was. And he said, well, and they began to explain to me, like, well, so this is 1994. Well, how do you find a job in 1994? The newspaper. So I get the Sunday paper, and I go through, and I found 5 apartment communities that were looking for maintenance help in areas that I was told were good places to live. Because this person said, if you live there and work there, you get money off your rent. I'm like, there you go. It's like, for me, it's like going below the zone, getting the promotion quicker in the Air Force, right? And so I'm always looking for solutions. How do we solve this? A lot of people want to get fixated on, how this happened, the blame. I like to believe I'm fixated on the solution. How do we get better? How do we solve this? And so on Monday morning, I have a typed resume on an old typewriter. I put on a suit. And I've got an old American Tourister hard shell briefcase, and I go to those 5 apartment communities, fill out an application. Back in 1994, when you came in to apply, they interviewed you on the spot. There wasn't like it is today. And so I went through 5 interviews, and by Wednesday, I had 5 job offers. All 5 of them offered me a job. South Point Apartments in Durham, North Carolina, 188 units, offered me $9 an hour and a completely comped, completely free apartment.
And that was the selling point.
That was it. Yep. That was the selling point.
So you got into maintenance, and now what happens next?
So I start the next day. Now I'm the maintenance supervisor. So I show up, I have a tie, I have a long sleeve button down white dress shirt, pair of dress pants. I'm not wearing a full suit, but as a supervisor, I felt I should look the part of a supervisor. And then I realized, I am not dressed for the right job. Yeah. I'm dressed to be the manager, not the maintenance guy. This isn't going to work. But listen, I learned very quickly that, this was something that came naturally to me. And very quickly, so I worked for a small mom and pop outfit. They had 7 properties, and the owner's wife ran the operations, and her husband was a CPA. So he did all the accounting, the bookkeeping, the taxes, all of that. And very quickly she discovered, wow, this new maintenance guy is he's different, because like I say, I wouldn't go home with an open work order, and I just never complain. Like I say, I don't focus on what went wrong. I focus on how to make it better. And I'm getting crazy feedback back then, here's how we got feedback from our residents. There was no online reviews. Yelp didn't exist. None of that stuff. Every time I do a work order, I would leave a card, a yellow card in the apartment that hoping that they would fill it out, put a stamp on it, mail it to the owner's office. And I started getting cards like crazy. They just started flowing in about this new maintenance guy.
And no, this wasn't protocol. This is something you just kind of created.
Oh, no, this was the company had this in place.
That
was their way of getting feedback from the residents.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So anytime the residents, they would get these cards for the manager, they'd get these cards for maintenance. And so I'm leaving them every time I do a work order because I was told that's what you're supposed to do. And, that's my military upbringing, my upbringing as a child. You do what you're told.
Yeah.
So I'm leaving these cards. And apparently I was making such an impression on the residents, they were filling them out like at a rate that the owners had never seen before. So like, who is this guy? What these people love this guy. And so now all of a sudden, Renee is coming and she's developing a personal relationship with me because she wants to nurture me. And now she's asking me to go to other properties and help out. And all of a sudden, and I'm on call all this time too. So, I'm helping at other properties. I'm solving problems there. I'm beginning to build a reputation. Well, my manager had a very mild case of cerebral palsy. Her name is Kathy Howard. And she and her husband, Marty, they got pregnant. They had a baby. And the pregnancy was so hard on her because of the cerebral palsy that they decided that she was not going to return to work. So now we need a manager. And so one day Renee invites me to go to a restaurant and have lunch with her. So we're having lunch and she said, Kathy's not coming back. I said, yeah, I know. She told me. She called me and told me. She's like, so we need a manager. So I'm thinking, okay, Angela, the assistant manager, is going to be the new manager. She just wants me to know I love Angela. I have no problem with that. She said, so we need a new manager. And Scott and I want you to be the manager. I'm sorry, what? You want me to be the manager? It's like, yeah. So the first question I asked was, do I get to keep my free apartment? Because, man, that apartment was a big thing for me, right? It's my lifeline. And I'll never forget, she sat back, she smiled, and she said, oh, Bill, we will never take your free apartment from you. I'm like, okay. So she gave me a raise to $11 an hour. So I made $2 an hour more. And so that was on a Friday. On Monday, I went into the office with that tie back on. I'm now the community manager. Assistant manager Angela, who I thought was my friend, was so hurt over this. Like, she couldn't believe it. Like, who does this? Who promotes the maintenance guy over me? I'm the assistant manager. So we had a little bit of a rough start between the two of us, and things went very badly because I had no idea what I was doing. They assumed that because I had been at the property for a year, that I would make an easy transition to community manager. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know anything about how to collect delinquent rent. I didn't know anything about how to process an application. And Angela was so hurt over not getting promoted that she wouldn't teach me. She wouldn't help me. She just sat back and enjoyed watching me fail. And it was awful. And finally, one day I went to her and I just said, Angela, let me ask you a question. Do you think you can learn anything at all from me? And she said, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot you could teach me. I said, I'd love to teach you, but you're not willing to learn. And I'll tell you another thing. There's so much you could teach me. And I'm willing to learn, but you're not willing to teach. So can we start learning and teaching together? And she started crying. I didn't mean to make her cry, but she started crying. She got emotional. She told me she was sorry. She hugged me. She started teaching. I started learning. We started solving problems and getting better. And next thing you know, our local apartment association names me community manager of the year. Previous year, they named me maintenance supervisor of the year. So I was supervisor of the year one year, community manager of the year the very next year. And then, of course, when that happens, other people are like, hey, this guy, who is this guy? This guy seems to, and then from there, it just took off. I became a regional manager, and, then I became the president and CEO of a management company, all within about a 3.5 year period.
That's incredible.
It's nuts, right?
That's incredible. In 3.5 years?
Yeah, in 3.5 years, yeah.
How big was the management company?
So the first one, just 10 properties, 2,000 units, 45 employees. It was a great place for me to really kind of learn how to run a management company. We were also a development company. So I was learning a heck of a lot about, behind the works, working with the municipalities, getting all the permits and all of that kind of stuff. And so I did that for a number of years, for 8 years. And then I left and I moved on to a much bigger company because I wanted to challenge myself. I want to see, is this transferable? This has worked extremely well. I mean, we became a great company. Like, we had no employee turnover. We had the highest rents. We were in one of the worst markets in the country for resident retention. We had crazy high resident retention because our service was so good. I'm very proud of what that team did and how they did it. I mean, we were really special for a small company. It was incredible how much we were able to accomplish and how our reputation became known in the industry outside of North Carolina. And so from there, I ended up in Pennsylvania with a company called Berger Communities. And so I was their COO for 5 years. And man, that was a highlight of my career in terms of running the management company, working with a team. And so really proud of what we accomplished there. At both companies, we use Satisfax for our resident satisfaction ratings. We achieved the highest ratings in the country for resident satisfaction. We became one of the best places to work in multifamily in the country at Berger for 3 years in a row. The first year we were number 22. The second year we were number 8. Number 10. The next year we were number 8, and just had a tremendous reputation in terms of being a great employer, being a great provider of quality housing who cared and responsive to our residents. I mean, I'm really proud of what we accomplished. It was a lot of fun.
How are you spending your time today?
So I am speaking full time. So I'm on the road. I'm writing. I've written 2 books now. I have one book called The Playbook. The most recent book is called Culture Grows. Really proud of that one. I have a podcast. That's probably not my favorite thing, but it's kind of what you have to do these days, right? The struggle there is finding people to come on. They say, yeah, I'll be a guest. And then when they're supposed to, they bail because they have jobs and, other things get in the way. But, the big thing is just, speaking, being on stage, sharing what I've learned with my audience. I talk a lot about leadership because I think, through my experience of leading the organization, my experience with the Air Force NCO Leadership Academy, I think that I have a pedigree that is very hard to match in terms of leadership, philosophy and being able to teach others how to lead. And so I do a lot on culture and leadership and team building. Then I offer some other things about, leasing, customer service, some of the things you kind of have to, some of the bread and butter of the industry. But the big thing is, my wife doesn't love me being gone. She actually enjoys having me home because then she has to do the dishes. But we have just a special relationship. She's fun to be around. I'm very lucky. A lot of people talk about, I married my best friend and, they fight all the time. I married my best friend and we don't fight. I mean, it's just
Where did you guys meet?
We've only been married 3.5 years. So I teach CAM, Certified Apartment Manager. It's one of the NAA designations. At one point, I taught CAM so many places across the country that about probably 3 in 5 people in this country who had their CAM had me as their instructor. I was teaching CAM literally all over the country. If your association could afford to pay for an instructor, I was probably going to be your instructor. So, I'm single. I come to Houston, and the first person to walk into the classroom to me looked like Heidi Klum. I'm like, okay, this is going to be a problem. This woman's beautiful. She took my breath away. And then she sat in the very front. I'm like, come on, don't do that to me. Because I'm here to teach. I'm not here to find a girlfriend. Yeah. And I was so smitten by her, not only just how beautiful she was, but her energy, her kindness, her sweetness, her just everything about her entire aura was just really special. You could just tell this is a really kind soul. And I'm really attracted to kindness. Kindness to me is like quality number 1.
Really?
Yeah. I love being around people who are kind. I try really hard to be kind. And so you could tell this is a really kind human being. And unbeknownst to me, she's sitting in class just looking up like, I think I'm falling in love with my instructor. And so after 6 days of teaching her, I asked if I could have her email address because I didn't want to be that weird guy. Like, can I have your number? Because that just seemed a little like, I think my instructor's hitting on me. So I asked for her email address. And I get to the airport. I'm living in Pennsylvania. I get to the airport to fly back to Pennsylvania, and I sent her an email and told her how much I enjoyed having her in class. And she responded back in a flirtatious way. I'm like, holy cow, I think this lady might actually like me.
Yeah.
And so after a couple emails, she said, if you want to talk to me, it's probably a lot easier if you text me. Here's my number. I'm like, yes, I got her number. And so tragically, I had a very dear friend, Mindy Williams. A lot of people in the industry, knew Mindy. She was one of the founders of the Apartment All-Stars. I was a part of the Apartment All-Stars. She passed away from cancer, and her funeral was in San Diego where she lived. And so I flew out to San Diego for the funeral, and I said to Lindsay, who's now my wife, hey, I'm going to be in California. Instead of flying back to Pennsylvania, would it be okay if I made a stop in Texas? We could go out and, get to know each other before I go back to Pennsylvania. And she said yes. So I flew to Texas and it started there. And, so we dated for a year, and then we were engaged for a year, and now we've been married for 3.5 years. So we're coming up on 6 years of when that relationship started.
Where can people find more about you, Bill?
Well, then go to my website, Bill Nye Apartment Guy. There's no "the" in it. It's not like Bill Nye the Apartment Guy. Just BillNyeApartmentGuy.com. That's probably the easiest way. They can find me on LinkedIn. I don't know how this has happened, but I'm close to 25,000 followers on LinkedIn. Not sure how that happened. Like, why are all these weirdos following me? I'm not that interesting, but it's kind of cool that has happened.
I disagree, man. You were very interesting. This has been a really fun, easy to talk to, engaging conversation.
Thanks.
I think like your experience in the Air Force and then teacher and maintenance supervisor and now speaker is very dynamic.
Thank you.
And I'm really glad we met and I got the chance to meet you.
Yeah, me too. This is, when I saw what you were doing, I sent you a message that I'm jealous because I think what you're doing, I love people who say, you know what, I'm going to do something that other people think about doing, but don't actually have, the nerve to actually do. I always say that, people who really achieve great things in life, it's not because they have more talent or more intellect than others. Oftentimes it's because they're willing to do something that other people think about doing, talk about doing, but never actually do. And when I saw what you're doing, I'm like, that is so cool. They're doing something that I think what you're doing, you'll look back on this 10 years from now, and you're going to say, that was one of the greatest experiences of my life. So, my hat's off to you guys for what you're doing. So
I appreciate it. No, and that's the hope. Exactly. It's kind of started as a crazy idea that we didn't think was going to happen. Even until the week that it was about to happen, I'm like, wait, am I really doing this? It felt very fictitious. And I guess now we're 2 weeks in and we're literally on an RV at an RV park, and there's proof here so you can see it. For those listening, this is not a facade.
Yeah, when you're trying to figure out what to do with your dirty socks, it's no longer fictitious, right? It's real.
Exactly. Well, Bill, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This has been amazing. I'm really glad we did this, and you're incredible all around.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.